I never expected the night that would change everything to begin with a spilled drink in a stranger's hand where it didn't belong. It was a Thursday, a corporate networking event at a rooftop bar downtown, the kind my company hosted twice a year to impress clients and exhaust employees. I was tired. I wanted to leave early. I had reports due by Friday morning and a cold cup of coffee waiting for me at home, but something made me stay. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way the evening felt slightly off, like a song playing in the wrong key. That's when I saw her, my boss, Elena Reyes, VP of Operations, the woman who could silence an entire boardroom with a single look, the woman who had never once called me by my first name in 2 years. She was at the far end of the bar, and she was not okay. 3 men surrounded her, loud, aggressive, the kind of confidence that comes from too much whiskey and too little decency. She was trying to stand straight, but her heels weren't cooperating. I didn't think, I just moved. I crossed the bar in 12 steps. I counted them later, in the silence of my own apartment, wondering at what point exactly my life had decided to take a sharp and unexpected turn. Hey. I placed myself between her and the loudest of the 3 men, a broad-shouldered guy in a loosened tie who smelled like he'd started drinking before the event even began. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you," I said it casually. Like we were old friends. Like this was completely normal. Elena looked at me with those sharp, dark eyes. Even unfocused from the alcohol, they still carried that familiar edge. For a half-second, I saw the question forming behind them. Who do you think you are? But she was smart. Even drunk, she was smarter than most people sober. She played along. "Sorry," she said, her voice only slightly unsteady. "I got held up." The broad-shouldered man took a step forward. "You know this guy?" "Yes," she said, and she looped her arm through mine with surprising firmness. "I do." The men exchanged glances. The moment stretched. Then the tension broke like a thread had pulled too tight, and they drifted away. Back toward the noise and the crowd, I exhaled slowly. She didn't. "I had it handled," she said quietly, not looking at me. "Of course you did," I said. She turned to look at me then, and I couldn't quite read the expression on her face. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't irritation either. It was something in between, something she didn't have a professional label for. "My car's outside," I said. "Let me take you home. I can call a driver. Ims Reyes." I kept my voice calm. "It's late. You're not okay right now, and I'm not leaving you here alone." Another long pause. The music from the bar pulsed around us, indifferent and loud. "Fine," she said finally. The word came out smaller than she probably intended. The drive was quiet at first. She sat in the passenger seat with her head tilted slightly toward the window, watching the city lights blur past. Her heels were off. She was holding them in her lap like she didn't quite know what to do with them. I kept my eyes on the road and said nothing. Sometimes silence is the kindest thing you can offer someone. "I don't usually drink like that," she said after about 10 minutes. "I know," I said. "You don't know anything about me." I smiled at that, just slightly. "I know you take your coffee black with no sugar. I know you arrive at the office 17 minutes before anyone else. I know you read every report twice before signing off on it, even the ones that are clearly fine." I paused. "And I know tonight was not a normal night for you." Silence again, but it was a different kind of silence this time, softer. "The Henderson account," she said quietly. "We lost it today. Finalized this afternoon." She pressed her lips together. 3 years of work. I heard rumors," I said carefully. 42 people on that project." Her voice didn't crack, but it came close. 42 people who worked themselves to the bone, and I couldn't close it. I didn't tell her it wasn't her fault. People say that too quickly, too easily, and it never lands the way they mean it to. Instead, I said, they're lucky to have a boss who actually carries that weight. She looked at me then, really looked at me, like she was seeing something she hadn't noticed before. "What's your name?" she asked. I blinked. "We've worked together for 2 years, Miss Reyes." "I know your last name," she said. "What's your first name?" Something about that question, so simple, so late in coming, hit me somewhere I wasn't prepared for. "Daniel," I said. She nodded slowly like she was filing it away somewhere important. "Daniel," she repeated quietly, and somehow the way she said it, just once, just like that, felt like the beginning of something I didn't yet have a name for. Her apartment was on the 14th floor of a building that looked exactly like her. Clean lines, quiet elegance. Nothing out of place, except tonight she was slightly out of place, and somehow that made everything feel more real. She fumbled with her keys at the door. I stood a respectful distance behind her, close enough to help if she needed it, far enough to give her the dignity of not needing it. She got the door on the second try and pushed it open without a word. She didn't invite me in. She also didn't tell me to leave. I took that as permission. The apartment was exactly what I expected, and nothing like I imagined. Organized, yes, but there were small signs of a life lived under pressure. A stack of folders on the kitchen counter, a half-finished cup of tea on the coffee table, long cold. A sticky note on the refrigerator that simply read, "Breathe." I noticed that last one and said nothing. She dropped her heels by the door and moved to the kitchen with the careful, deliberate steps of someone trying very hard to appear more sober than they were. "Water," she announced, like it was a business decision. "Good idea," I said. She filled a glass, drank half of it standing at the sink, then refilled it and held it out to me. "I'm fine," I said. "Take it," she said. "You drove, you're probably tired." It was the closest thing to thank you that I suspected she knew how to say in that moment. I took the glass. We stood on opposite sides of the kitchen counter like it was a boardroom table, old habits finding their footing even here. "You should eat something," I said, glancing at the refrigerator. "I'm not hungry. Ms. Reyes." "Elena." She said it quietly but clearly. "Tonight just Elena." That landed differently than I expected. I set the glass down. "Elena," I said carefully, like I was learning a new word in a language I'd always wanted to speak. "You should eat something." She almost smiled. "Not quite, but almost. You're very persistent for someone who's technically off the clock." "Consider it a personal flaw," I said. She opened the refrigerator, stared into it for a moment with the expression of someone reading a document they don't understand, then closed it. "There's nothing in there," she said. "There are eggs. I can't cook." I stared at her. "You run a department of 60 people, and I order takeout every single night. Different skills, Daniel." There it was again, my name. The way she said it was still new, unhurried, like she was getting comfortable with the shape of it. "Sit down," I said. "I'll make something." She looked at me for a long moment. I expected resistance. Instead, she moved to the small dining table near the window and sat down, folding her hands in front of her like she was waiting for a meeting to begin. I found eggs, butter, some cheese that was still good, and bread that was almost still good. I said nothing about the state of her refrigerator. I just cooked. "You didn't have to stay," she said from behind me. "I know. Most people would have called a cab and considered their good deed done." "Probably," I agreed. "So why didn't you?" I thought about it honestly before answering. "Because you looked like someone who was used to handling everything alone, and sometimes that's the loneliest thing in the world to watch." A long silence followed, the kind that has weight to it. "That's a very presumptuous thing to say to your boss," she said finally. "You told me to call you Elena tonight." "Touché," she said softly. I plated the eggs and set them in front of her. She looked down at them, then up at me, and something in her expression shifted, quietly, carefully, like a door opening just 1 inch. "Sit with me," she said, not an order. Not a request from a VP to an employee, just a woman, asking a man not to leave her alone in the quiet. I sat down, and we talked, really talked, for the first time in 2 years, about the pressure she carried, about the version of herself she'd locked away to survive in boardrooms full of people waiting for her to stumble, about how exhausting it was to be untouchable. I listened. Not the way you listen to a boss, the way you listen to someone who matters. By the time she finished eating, her eyes were heavy, and her voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "I think," she started. "You should sleep," I said gently. She nodded slowly, too tired to argue. She stood, steadied herself against the table, and then looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in 2 years of working side by side. Unguarded, completely, quietly unguarded. "Daniel," she said. "Yeah?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then simply said, "Thank you." 2 words. But the way she said them, like they cost her something, told me everything. I made sure she was settled. I left a glass of water on the nightstand. I locked the front door behind me with the spare key she'd handed me without even realizing it, and I stood in the hallway for a moment, just breathing. Whatever tonight was, Whatever shift had happened in the quiet space between two people who were supposed to keep their distance, I knew one thing with complete certainty. Nothing between us would ever be quite the same again. I told myself, on the drive home, that it meant nothing. I told myself the same thing while I stared at the ceiling of my apartment at 2 in the morning, and again while I stood in the shower at 6, and once more while I knotted my tie in the mirror, looking at a version of myself that didn't entirely believe what he was saying. By the time I walked into the office at 8:45, I had constructed a very reasonable, very professional narrative. Last night was an isolated incident, a human moment in an otherwise structured relationship. She was my boss, I was her employee. The hierarchy was clear, the boundaries were necessary, and the right thing to do was to walk in there, sit at my desk, and pretend the whole evening had simply never happened. I was good at being professional. I was less good at forgetting the way she'd said my name. The office was already humming with its usual morning rhythm. Keyboards, coffee, quiet conversations. I settled at my desk, opened my laptop, and had almost convinced myself I was completely fine when her office door opened. Elena Reyes walked out looking exactly like Elena Reyes always looked, pressed blazer, hair immaculate, expression calibrated to reveal precisely nothing. She moved through the floor with that familiar contained authority, and not a single person in the room would have guessed that 12 hours ago she'd been holding a glass of water with slightly unsteady hands in her own kitchen. She didn't look at me. I told myself that was fine. Expected, even. Professional. I looked back at my screen. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then my phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Meeting request. Elena Reyes. 9:15 a.m. My office, mandatory. I stared at it, just me. No other attendees. No subject line. No agenda attached. I set my phone down carefully and took one slow breath. Her office was glass-walled on 2 sides, which meant the entire floor could see who was inside and roughly read the temperature of any conversation by body language alone. It was by design, transparency as performance. Everything visible, nothing hidden. I knocked at exactly 9:15. "Come in," she said. I stepped inside. She was at her desk, a document open in front of her that she wasn't reading. I could tell by the way her eyes moved. Too still, too deliberate. "Close the door," she said. I closed it. The room felt smaller than usual. She didn't gesture to the chair across from her desk, the professional chair, the one reserved for reports and evaluations. Instead, she simply looked at me, and for a moment neither of us said anything. Then she said it, calm, measured, like a statement in a quarterly review. I remember everything. The air in the room shifted. I kept my expression steady, but something moved behind my ribs, a slow, complicated feeling I couldn't immediately name. "Mrs. Reyes, everything, Daniel." She held my gaze without flinching. The bar, the drive, the eggs. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to matter. The things I said. I said nothing. Waiting, she stood slowly and moved to the window, looking out over the city below with her arms folded, not defensively, but like she was holding something together. "I owe you an apology," she said. That surprised me. "You don't. I put you in an uncomfortable position." "You were in danger," I said. "I did what anyone would have done." She turned to look at me then, and something in her expression told me clearly that she didn't entirely believe that. "Not anyone," she said quietly. The silence between us was different from the ones at the office. The clipped, functional silences of meetings and deadlines. This one had texture, history, the weight of a night that had changed the shape of something without either of us signing off on it. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Okay." Her jaw tightened slightly, the only visible sign that this cost her something. "Last night, the things I told you, about the account." She stopped, started again. "Does anyone else know?" "No," I said immediately. "And they won't." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "Thank you, Elena." The name left my mouth before the professional filter could catch it. Her eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something, surprise maybe, or something closer to recognition. "I should go," I said quickly. "I have the Morrison brief due by noon, Daniel." I stopped at the door. "I remember that too," she said quietly. "What you said. About people who carry everything alone." I turned back to look at her. She was still by the window, and the morning light was doing something honest to her face, softening the edges she worked so hard to maintain. "Was it true?" she asked. What you said? Or were you just being kind? I held her gaze across the room. I don't say things I don't mean, Miss Reyes, a beat. Then the corner of her mouth moved, just slightly. Not quite a smile, something quieter than that. Something that felt earned. No, she said softly. I don't suppose you do. I left her office. I sat back down at my desk. I opened the Morrison brief and stared at it for a full 3 minutes without reading a single word, and somewhere behind me, through the glass wall, I was almost certain I could feel her doing the same thing. If you're feeling this tension as much as I was, trust me, it only gets more complicated from here. Hit that like button so this story finds someone who needs it today. The rumors started on a Tuesday. I don't know who saw us leave the networking event together. I don't know if it was someone from accounting who happened to be passing the parking garage, or someone from her floor who noticed the calendar invite with no subject line. In a company of 200 people, secrets don't stay secrets. They simply change shape. They become whispers over lunch, loaded glances in elevator rides, conversations that stop half a second too late when you walk into a room. By Wednesday morning, I could feel it. The way Marcus from the 3rd floor held eye contact a beat too long when I passed him in the hallway. The way Jenny from HR smiled at me with something behind it that wasn't entirely friendly. Small things. The kind of things you notice only when you're already watching for them. I said nothing. I kept my head down and my work clean and my expression completely neutral. Alina, for her part, was extraordinary at this. She became, almost overnight, more formal with me than she had ever been. She stopped making eye contact during team meetings. My reports went through her assistant instead of directly to her. In the weekly brief, she referred to me twice as Mr. Carter, in a tone so professionally appropriate it was almost architectural. She was building a wall. I understood why. I even respected it. That didn't make it hurt any less. It was a Thursday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the night at the bar, when I was called into HR. Patricia Hale, Senior HR Director, a woman who delivered difficult conversations with the warm efficiency of someone who had done it many times and felt genuinely bad about none of them. She offered me coffee. I declined. She opened a folder. Daniel, she began, which already told me this wasn't routine. HR used last names in routine conversations. I want to have an open, informal conversation. Nothing on record yet. Of course, I said. There's been some talk, she said carefully, about you and Miss Reyes, specifically about the night of the Henderson event. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. I want to give you the opportunity to speak to it directly and honestly. I looked at her calmly. Miss Reyes was unwell at the end of the event. I made sure she got home safely. That's the entirety of it. Patricia nodded slowly, in the way that people nod when they're deciding how much of what you've said they believe, and there's nothing beyond a professional relationship between the two of you. She's my direct supervisor, I said. I respect that boundary. Another nod. She made a small note. I appreciate your candor, Daniel. I want you to know that this company takes its conduct policy seriously. Any relationship, romantic or otherwise, between an executive and a direct report would need to be disclosed immediately and would trigger a mandatory review. She paused to let that land. I understand, I said. I'm sure you do. She closed the folder. That's all for now. I sat in the stairwell on the 2nd floor for 4 minutes after that meeting, not because I was afraid, but because I needed 4 minutes to be honest with myself in a way I couldn't afford to be anywhere else in that building. Because the truth, the one I'd been arranging professional language around all week, was simpler and more inconvenient than any HR policy. I thought about her constantly. Not in the way you think about a problem you're trying to solve. In the way you think about a song you heard once in a place you can't go back to. Quietly, persistently, at inconvenient moments. I thought about the sticky note on her refrigerator that said breathe. I thought about the way she'd asked me to sit with her. Not as a boss, just as a person who didn't want to be alone. I thought about the way she'd said thank you like it cost her something real. And I thought about the wall she was building now, brick by careful brick, and how I could see in the precise straightness of her posture every morning that it was costing her something too. That was the thing about Alina Reyes. She was exceptional at performing composure, but I had seen the sticky note. I knew what was underneath. I went back to my desk. I opened my work. I did everything right, and 2 floors above me, behind a glass wall in a corner office. I wondered if she was doing the same thing, performing normalcy with both hands while something quieter and more honest waited in the spaces between. This is the part of the story that stayed with me the longest. If you've ever had to pretend something didn't matter when it mattered completely, drop a comment below. I think more of us have been here than we admit. She called me into her office on a Friday evening when the floor was almost empty. Not through her assistant, not through a calendar invite. She appeared at the edge of my desk at 6:43, when most of the team had already filtered out into their weekends, and she said quietly, "Do you have a minute?" It wasn't really a question. I followed her. The office felt different after hours. The city outside her window had shifted from sharp afternoon light to the soft amber of early evening, and the glass walls that usually made everything visible now only reflected the 2 of us back to ourselves. 2 people standing in a lit room while the rest of the floor sat dark and quiet around us. She didn't sit behind her desk. That was the first thing I noticed. She stood near the window instead, and she had her arms folded in that way she did when she was holding something carefully. Not defensively, but like someone carrying something fragile across a room. "I know about the HR meeting," she said. I wasn't surprised. "Okay." Patricia came to me afterward. She paused. "She asked me the same question she asked you. What did you tell her?" She looked at me steadily. "The same thing you did, I imagine." The room was quiet enough that I could hear the distant sound of the city below, muffled and constant, like a low note held indefinitely. "Alina, there's something I need to say to you," she said, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond." I nodded. She unfolded her arms, let them fall to her sides, a small gesture that felt from her like a significant one. "What frightens me," she began carefully, "is not HR. It's not the policy, it's not the review, it's not even what people are saying." She stopped, drew one measured breath. "What frightens me is how safe I felt that night." The words landed quietly, the way true things do, without drama, without decoration. "I have spent 8 years in this company," she continued, "building something very specific. A version of myself that is competent and contained, and never, under any circumstances, needs anything from anyone." Her jaw tightened slightly, and in one evening she stopped again, shook her head once. "You made eggs." I felt something loosen in my chest. "They were good eggs." She looked at me sharply. "Sorry," I said. "You said let you finish." The corner of her mouth moved, that almost smile that I had begun to catalog like someone collecting rare things. "Yes, I did." She turned back to the window. "I've been thinking about 2 options," she said, her voice returning to its professional register, not because she felt professional, I realized, but because structure was how she managed things that scared her. "The first is requesting that you be transferred to the Meridian Division. Different floor, different reporting line, clean separation." The word transferred landed like a stone dropped into still water. "And the second?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "The second is more complicated. Tell me anyway." She turned to face me fully then, and in the amber light of that empty office, she looked like someone who had made a decision and was still deciding whether to trust it. "The second is that I consider stepping down from my position," she said, voluntarily, "which would dissolve the direct reporting relationship and remove the policy conflict entirely." I stared at her. "Elena, you can't." 8 years, she said simply. "I know what I built. I also know." She stopped. Something moved across her face. "I know what it felt like to not be alone in my kitchen at midnight, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since." The silence that followed was the longest one we'd shared. I crossed the room, not all the way. I stopped a careful distance from her, close enough that this was clearly a choice, and far enough that it was still hers to make. "I won't let you give up what you built," I said quietly. "Not for me. Not for anyone." "Then what do you suggest?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "I suggest," I said slowly, "that we stop pretending this is only a problem and start treating it like something worth handling the right way." She searched my face. "The right way involves HR, a formal disclosure, a review process, and probably a restructuring of your entire role. It will be uncomfortable and public and complicated. I know that too, and you're willing—" "Elena." I held her gaze. I drove you home on a Thursday night because I didn't want to leave you alone in a bar. I'm not going to leave you alone in this either." Her breath caught, just slightly, just enough. And then, for the first time, in 2 years and 1 week of knowing each other, she smiled, not the almost smile, not the professional courtesy expression, a real one, small and quiet and completely unguarded. It lasted only a moment, but I held on to it like it was something I intended to keep. "You are," she said softly, "profoundly inconvenient, Daniel Carter." "I've been told," I said. She shook her head slowly, but the smile didn't entirely leave. She looked back out at the city, the lights coming on one by one across the skyline, patient and inevitable. "Give me the weekend," she said quietly. "To think." "Take it," I said. I moved toward the door, stopped at the threshold. "Elena." She looked at me over her shoulder. "The sticky note on your refrigerator," I said. "The one that says breathe." Her expression stilled. "It's good advice," I said gently. "For both of us." I left her there by the window, and I took the stairs down instead of the elevator. Slowly, one step at a time, with the particular feeling of someone who has just said exactly the right thing and has absolutely no idea what comes next. We're almost at the end of this story, and I promise you, what happens next is worth staying for. If this has moved you even a little, subscribe so you don't miss the final part. This is the kind of ending that stays with you. She called me on Sunday evening, not a calendar invite, not a message through her assistant. My personal phone, which she had never used before, lit up with her name at 7:23 p.m. while I was standing in my kitchen doing nothing in particular, just existing in the quiet way you do when you're waiting for something without admitting you're waiting. I answered on the second ring. "I've been thinking," she said. No greeting, no preamble, completely Elena. "I figured." I said a pause, then quietly, "I don't want you transferred." Something in my chest settled. "Okay, and I'm not resigning." Her voice was steady, decided. "I worked too hard for that office and I refuse to let fear make that decision for me." "Good," I said, "which means we do this the right way." She exhaled slowly, the sound of someone setting down something heavy they'd been carrying for days. "Monday morning I'm requesting a formal meeting with Patricia and the executive committee. Full disclosure. I'll recommend a structural adjustment. You'd move to the strategic development team. Different reporting line, no direct supervisory conflict. That's a good team," I said carefully. "It's an excellent team," she said. "And you're good enough to belong there. This isn't a demotion, Daniel. I need you to understand that." "I do," I said, and I meant it. Another pause. Softer this time. "I'm scared," she said. Those 2 words from Elena Reyes, the woman who silenced boardrooms, who carried 42 people's work on her shoulders without flinching, landed with more weight than anything else she could have said. "I know," I said gently. "I don't do this," she continued. "I don't let people in. I don't say things like what I said to you Friday night. I don't smile at people in empty offices and then spend the entire weekend thinking about." She stopped herself. "About?" I asked quietly. "A beat." "About whether they're thinking about it too," she admitted. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Outside my window the city hummed its low, constant note. "Elena, I haven't thought about anything else since Thursday." The silence that followed was warm, the kind that doesn't need filling. "Monday is going to be uncomfortable," she said finally. Yes, I agreed. "Patricia is going to look at both of us with that expression she has. The one that's professionally sympathetic but personally judgmental. That's the one." And there it was, that quiet laugh I had heard only once before, in a kitchen at midnight, and had not stopped thinking about since. Low and genuine and completely unperformed. "We'll survive, Patricia," I said. "We'll survive, Patricia," she agreed. Monday morning arrived the way important mornings do. Ordinary on the surface, quietly historic underneath. I walked into the office at 8:45. She was already there. She always was. She didn't avoid my eyes this time. Across the length of the floor, through the quiet bustle of morning arrivals and coffee cups and opening laptops, she looked at me directly. A steady, clear, this is real look that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. I nodded once. She nodded back. Then she walked into Patricia's office and I sat at my desk and we both did what we had decided to do. Together, separately, honestly, the meeting lasted 40 minutes. I was called in for the final 15. Patricia did, in fact, make the expression. The executive committee asked careful questions. Elena answered them with the precise, undefensive clarity of someone who had already made her peace with the outcome. The structural adjustment was approved by Wednesday. I moved to strategic development the following Monday. A different floor, a different reporting line, a different view of the city from a different desk. But that evening, Elena Reyes texted my personal phone at 6:51. "New team suits you." I looked at it for a moment, then typed back, "How would you know? You can't see my new desk from your office." 3 minutes passed. I walked by. I smiled at my phone in the way that people smile when they're alone and don't have to manage the size of it. "That's not very VP of you," I typed. "No," she replied. "It isn't. That was 4 months ago. We take it slowly, deliberately, with the kind of care that two people use when they understand what they're handling. There are no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations. There are Sunday evening phone calls and occasional dinners, and the quiet, steady practice of letting someone know you, really know you, without performing a version of yourself that's easier to maintain. She still arrives at the office 17 minutes before anyone else. She still reads every report twice. She still carries more than she should, and she's still learning, slowly, stubbornly, beautifully, that she doesn't have to carry all of it alone. Last week I found a sticky note on my new desk. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first. Then I did. It said, "Thank you. For the eggs. For everything." I folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket. I've kept it there since because that's the thing about love. If that's even the right word for what this is becoming. This slow and honest and inconvenient thing between two people who were supposed to keep their distance. It doesn't always arrive with certainty or perfect timing or a clean, unobstructed path. Sometimes it arrives on a Thursday night in a bar where you weren't planning to stay. Sometimes it's 12 steps across a crowded room. Sometimes it's eggs at midnight and a sticky note and a woman who says, "Thank you," like it costs her something, learning, slowly, that with the right person, it doesn't have to. I saved my boss from trouble on a Thursday night. The next morning she told me she remembered everything. As it turns out, so do I, every single detail. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you've made it all the way here, thank you for staying. That means more than you know. Subscribe. Because the next story is already waiting. And I think it might be the one that stays with you longest.